This computer. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited. We've been working on this for a while.
A long while.
A long while. And it's a little bit before. I'm just making sure that we're actually on. Sometimes, there we are. It doesn't show up. And then I have to turn down the volume because it's about a 3-second delay. So I hear myself halfway through. So, and anyway, welcome. Hi, Cynthia. Cynthia's joined us, but she's off camera, and that's fine. And I want to welcome everybody. Hi, Cynthia.
Kitty. Hi, Kitty.
Yeah. So you can join us on camera or just listening. I'm very excited about this. Let's see. It is we can start. We can start a minute early. We do have some people jumping on live. So welcome to Intuition of the Soul. And our amazing guest today is Jackie, my friend, my buddy Jackie, who is here to talk about healing generational trauma and the astrological aspects of it. And which, of course, I'm fascinated by, and she and I have talked about this a lot. So she's very graciously allowed me to chime in with what I know. And really, there is so much that's available to us about in this particular time with healing, especially in this energy as we come up to the solar eclipse. If you're watching this, this is being streamed on 4/4 before the solar eclipse. And this was perfect timing because a lot of what's happening right now is this healing, is this letting go of what has separated us. So, Jackie, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you arrived where you are. And our friend Stephanie's watching. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie. Hi, I'm Jackie.
Here.
Oh, there she is. Hi, I'm Jackie Beal. I'm a generational trauma specialist, and I work with women right now who are really know what it takes to be self-love, boundaries, what it takes to be healthy, just don't really know how to apply it to them. And so we work on that. But what I've gathered is so many of us are carrying so much trauma before we even get here. And it was interesting for myself when I realized a lot of the things that when we're dealing with trauma, that one thing that always keeps popping up, and it's like, why does that always happen to me? I always feel like that's because that's your lesson. And I found for myself when I started investigating some of the aspects of my astrological birth chart, I was finding that a lot of my wounded healer, my North Node, things were all in line of all the things I had wondered, why is this me? What is this? And it just made sense to me. And another thing I've noticed with that, carrying in that DNA, is I always tell my clients, that times that you get anxious and you really don't even know why, it's just that moment. Lots of times I believe that that's the DNA in us. That's that DNA trauma we carry. And we're not necessarily triggered by any event personally. We just don't know why we're having an anxious moment. And so we take a deep breath. And I think it's just truly carrying on that generational trauma. And it's a moment that we feel it because it's right in there.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? Because it is interesting. We know we're electric beings and this DNA component of it. Can you kind of expand on that? Because I know astrologically why that makes amazing sense, but would you expand a little bit for us?
Well, your DNA, I mean, of course, there's all kinds of things that are transferred in DNA. There's your emotions, there's your mother's emotions. There's the hearing that came in and all the things we took in before we even came in. So as we come out, DNA isn't just necessarily exactly the genes. There's a lot of imprints on our DNA. And that's just there when we arrive, too. I mean, of course, there's some along the way, and we probably pass ours on too, add to it or heal it, or, and that's why people talk about healing helps you. When you deal with your emotions, it helps you heal physically. Exactly. And I believe it's those reasons, because you're kind of changing that DNA part, that part that's carrying all of the past trauma that goes within the family.
Well, and we're at this amazing juncture with humankind, of really looking at those things that we have uh, created as separateness, that we have passed down in our DNA, to, this comet that's going through right now, this eclipse, is all about re-sparking and those conversations in those planets to help us move beyond, oh, I'm just made up from what's come through me. Yeah,
And I feel like in this energy right now too, it's unearthing a lot of the trauma. So even things that we're being triggered by, we're just having a lot of unsettling moments that we're not even sure why we're having them right now. There's, of course, I feel like we're all having little things pop up, but also I just feel that underlining unsettledness right now is in this energy. We're unearthing a lot of that inner child wound, inner wound, generational trauma wound, things that we've been just carrying some of it doesn't even belong to us, really. We just
right,
carry it.
we do. We carry it. And that's something that we often hear people talk about in healing, is find, is it yours? You know,
Yes.
and this particular period of time, I know myself, we were just talking earlier today, get ready for this, and I said, it feels like anxiety. And you looked and you're on the phone going, it is anxiety. I'm like, but I'm not anxious about anything. I mean, can you share what you said to me? It was great, because it was like, it's coming through, but not
It's just real, it's coming out. And that's the point. You're just feeling it. That's it. You're just feeling it. And it's unearthing right now with the energy. But like I said, it's just coming out and we're feeling it. And it doesn't even belong to us. So that might help with the unsettled feelings one has during this time. But what I find fascinating about what we're going to talk about tonight is getting down to some of the basic little cores that people can work on. They can start looking at, wow, this could be, I feel it'll ring true for everybody, but I feel that this could be a place I could start. I could really understand why I feel this way, why this always happens. You know, what am I supposed to learn from this? And so
right.
those kinds of,
So, what would you say? Let's just start right at the top. What would you say is like the top thing people can look at when they're looking at healing generational trauma, and maybe looking at kind of the energy that they start to look at when you start to look at your astrological chart?
well, I would say to start with Chiron, the wounded healer. That would be my first place to start with and see where it falls under which sign. And then there's so many of them, but yeah, that would be probably the one I would
And
start with.
Chiron is the mother line.
Yeah.
Chiron is handed through the mother line. That so, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. I,
Well, and it says it's our deepest wounds. This is off of your optimize, and people will, and our efforts to heal that wound. And so it it it's an aha moment. That's what I feel the Chiron does, is gives us an aha moment and brings us to the center. And then from them, there's a lot of other ones as well. So
yeah,
I find that one to be really interesting. And we talked about this. You starting out when we're talking generational trauma, inner child trauma, I feel that so much of it, we start out and we take on our mother's birth chart, or the person who's raising us, their birth chart. We're living their life at first. So we're gathering knowledge through their eyes or through their birth chart, through their being. But then we're also interacting, and you and I were talking about this with our planets lining with their planets. We can get deeper on that some other time. But I'm just saying, I feel that we kind of are that blank slate, and in a way, and we take on whoever is kind of caretaking for us at first. So once again, passing on that generational trauma that doesn't
well,
belong to us.
and that's a great place to start. So for those who are not up on what Chiron is actually an asteroid. It lives between, it has a very unusual orbit, by the way, and it really lives between Saturn, which is our planet of structure, our planet of boundaries, our planet of limitations, but it's also our planet that shows us what's important and gives us constraints so that we have we need boundaries. And if you've ever worked with children, boy, do we need, they need boundaries. And between that planet, which is considered one of our daily energies, a bridge planet, and Chiron lives between those daily energies that we work with every single day and those outer energies, those energies that are about undercurrents that bubble up through us and they're lifelong. Um, think of them as underground rivers and of lava and volcanoes, and there's a presence and an energy that we comes through with that, and it lives on that bridge that called the Rainbow Bridge there, and it's a wounded healer. It's also called an alchemist and a shaman, and it is the placement about where it's the archetype. We never quite heal it, but we learn to use it as a tool. And depending, it would make sense to look at your mother's Chiron and your Chiron and see what conversation, you know, is my placement actually sparking her placement and her wound. And if you were raised, I wasn't raised by a person who didn't work with her wound, but she wasn't there. My mother passed away, so that has its own piece
Yeah, and
of not having someone to help you with those limits. And it's not to say that fathers don't, but it really is handed down through the mother's line. So if you don't have the opportunity to find out what their family history is, how you interpret your wound and that energy is big. And if you have a parent who is working from the, let's call it the denser expression of the wound, the what gets in their way versus how I use it as a tool, that's quite a thing to pass on to a child
and
with their wound.
you've already, we talked about it, had the imprint in your DNA in the womb with that kind of mother, any kind of mother, but you know, you're getting the imprints on you already, then you're coming in and you're living through her eyes for a while, taking on her things, yet having your own self. You know, I just read a thing where they were saying that children do not form their very own thought. Now, I hope you understand what this means, till about the age of 4. They have their momentary, but their own futuristic thought like that. So that's a long time to be kind of just in a reactive, in the present moment time
Yes, at
frame.
4, autonomy is what is the concept that
Exactly, but they
starts.
can kind of
Yes,
futuristically see themselves, you
right.
know,
Autonomy,
versus
and
just
then
moment.
it's the time when it reverses from I'll just do it and it's magical and mom will always be here and I'll always be taken care of to, oh, wait a minute, there's not as autonomy allows me permanence and not permanence, both. And
And
yeah,
when
that makes
we talk
perfect
about
sense.
child development, oftentimes there's debates on when you are who you are. Now, used to say 10, then they went down to age 7, you are who you are. Some now are debating 3 to 4. So when you really think about that, you know, you've taken on 4 years of someone else's perspective, because I believe trauma is a perspective. It truly happens, but it's
Ex-
perspective on that.
Explain that a little bit, because that's an interesting, different way to look at trauma.
Well,
Because
you know, we hear those people that say, "Oh, there's good in everything, and you can't really see it and all that." But I, I do believe that. I do believe that what ends up happening is you change your perspective. Like, what did I gain from that? You just can see everything as it truly is, and not what your trauma eyes want to see. So you just see what it is for the moment.
excuse me, would you explain trauma eyes? I had never heard
Yeah.
this concept before, and I've learned it from Jackie, and it's fascinating. Um, she tells her own story of how this works because that makes a lot of sense when we go back to Chiron. I have experienced somebody's wound, and that's my reality. And so that's how I think the world is in those 4 years. And that's how I react to things. I make an internal set of rules, and that's what I go by. So, would you talk about trauma eyes? This fascinated me.
Okay, so as you know, when we grow up in trauma, we don't have I always say this, we didn't get good role models for self-love, boundaries, or just being calm. Those were things that really don't happen when you grow up in trauma. And so we tend to see, let's just take being calm, for instance, as the shoe's going to drop as a kid. So you get anxious. You try to be really good. You don't know what to do to fill the time. You don't know. You're just waiting. That works pretty well in childhood because you can distract. You might keep the trauma at bay. But when you get into adulthood, that same behavior isn't appropriate anymore. So we have to learn that we are seeing the world through our trauma eyes. And when you look through trauma eyes, you can see anything you want to see. If you believe people always lie to you, you will see they're always lying to you, whether they really are or not. If you think people don't like you, they can say it the nicest tone ever. You're just going to hear, well, did you hear what she said? She said, you know, and the point is you're seeing everything through your trauma. So you're not really doing anything better for yourself. You're just trying to prove all your trauma right, is really how I want to say it. You're just trying to prove all of the trauma right. If you have a fear of abandonment, you're just going to prove that everybody's going to abandon you. And unfortunately, that's where self-sabotage comes in, but that's what it stems from, is you're looking through trauma eyes. You want to see that happen to you. And you know why? It's comfortable, not your fault. You grew up in it. It
And,
feels
and,
very natural to you.
and that's where your planet Mars comes in. How I align, so you want to talk to that a little bit, because if I'm looking at it and this is how I'm putting my will, that placement of will is
Yes,
becomes.
and Mars is an Aries planet, and it's also an aggression planet if it's not done, if it's an opposition, can be bring in a lot of that. So you can actually be geared to look through your trauma eyes that way. And the point you have to realize is you have to say, no, not everybody. There's no possible way everybody in the world can be lying to me. There's no possible way everybody hates me. I mean, you have to start somewhere, but that's a whole different deal. But the point is, if you're living with your trauma eyes, you will see what you want to see. It's kind of like when I couldn't get pregnant and everybody was pregnant. I mean, everybody, so it was one of those things. You can see what you want to see.
Mhm.
And I wanted to see how I was failing and everybody else. You can see what you want to see when you live in trauma. You really can.
Yeah, we were talking about that Mars placement in astrology, especially the house at that point, because it's a daily energy. And if you're aligning your will with what you think the rules are, this trauma with your eyes, boy, you will be able to completely spark new things that will prove your narrative to be correct. So Mars is also a placement in your chart that can help you look at, how do I look at trauma? What are some other ones? Because it's
Uh,
very interesting.
yeah, let's talk about Pluto.
Mm.
Okay, why don't you
One
tell
of
us
my
about
favorite,
Pluto?
one of my
Yeah, you go
favorite
ahead.
planets.
Go ahead and tell it. Me too. But go ahead. You tell us about it.
And by the way, we're both Scorpios.
Yeah.
And so Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio. Pluto is that planet of transformation. Pluto's home base is the eighth house, the house of the taboo, the house of the darkness, the house of birth and death and the cycle of life. And so, and Pluto is one of those outer planets. So it's an energy that bubbles up, that's constantly an undercurrent of everything that happens. Like if you study astrology at all, when Pluto is transited by another planet, it lasts a lot longer than those daily energies, because it's a bigger vibrational interference at movement. And so uh, Pluto is a very powerful planet, and it's a planet of darkness. It is the shadow work. The planet of Pluto
And
is
shadow work, meaning in the healing your trauma, is looking at all the things that you yourself aren't very proud of, all the things you don't want to look at, all the things you want to stuff down, and truly, really just learning to embrace them. Because really, but that's what shadow work would be, and that's a lot with Pluto. Pluto will tell you a lot where that is. So that would be a planet I would investigate.
Yeah, because what Pluto is, and it's also then becomes a powerful ally, because it is the place we can transform. And again, if I'm not aware of, with my trauma eyes, I can transform, like, to make things match my narrative. to plant the seeds so that when I need them, I've also learned this from Jackie, I can go back and make things real. And it's
Yeah.
like, wow. So I can transform it to being that. And, in general, any eighth house placement that is that house of energy, Scorpio, can have some effect similar to Pluto. And and Pluto does not move fast. Pluto right now is in Aquarius. And the last time it was in Aquarius was the Revolutionary War, the French Revolution. So it does not move fast, 246 years. So again, that's why it's
Well,
such
and I
a
always
big
tell
temperature.
people when you're looking at this stuff and you go to your chart and you're going to look up Chiron, you're going to look up your Pluto, you're going to look up your Mars, hover above it and look at it. Don't look at it and own it and drag yourself down with your trauma on it. Hover above it and look down on it and go, that makes sense. This makes sense. Bless you. All of those things
Thank
make
you.
sense now. And otherwise, otherwise you just look at yourself and go, oh my gosh, no wonder I'm this. It isn't that. You're not set in stone. It's just a guide. It's to tell you where you are, what you're here to do, what your purpose might be.
Well, any energy, no matter what they are, Chiron, you can get into what the wound is. I'll use mine as an example. I am Chiron in Aquarius. Chiron in Aquarius is because Aquarius is about the collective, Aquarius is about the bigger picture. Chiron in Aquarius is a wound in, do I really have any? I know that I'm unique, but nobody needs that uniqueness. There's no value in that uniqueness. And so the I could get into that and just say either turn my life into so I'm like a robot. I do everything the same as everybody, always trying to look the same, not different. Or I can work with, okay, so when I start feeling not unique or that there's nothing of value in this uniqueness, there's nothing special about me, where that's an indication that there's something I can do to help align and heal. And it's working with other people to accept their uniqueness. So all energies live in a duality. I can use that Mars energy we were talking about rather than it being a warrior, I'm right, you're wrong, a let's start something together and together we'll move forward, we'll align both of our wills, we'll figure out, it's the difference between voting and consensus. How do we move together? How do we create together? Pluto, um, do I just rip things apart because I'm transforming them so I make them align? Or do I use, and the idea is I'm going into the darkness, I'm going to find the good, like you were saying. There was something for me to learn. So again, I love that idea. Hover over it. What is the energy about? Not the judgment around the energy.
Exactly.
What is the energy about that I can even look at trauma with? What are some other placements? Um,
Saturn. Let's talk Saturn. There's a karma. And I don't know, Saturn to me is kind of like the wet towel you're carrying around for a while, or the baggage you're going to be kind of dragging in this one. I mean, nothing is that. Would you agree with something like that, Kitty?
yeah, Saturn is the planet of our boundaries, our limitations. It is our structure. And when we learn not to to judge, drudge is kind of true too. Um, where our structure is, what we're doing, how we interact with it, we then have the ability to change those boundaries. So that makes kind of, tell me what you would look at that with when you're looking at generational trauma and healing it.
I would just look at it more like where our challenges lie, and based on other things, but really kind of where, I don't know. That's what I would look at, like our karmic energy, our karmic lesson, our karmic challenge might be. And again, when I say challenge, I can mean just what might drag us down, what we might need to work on to not get drugged down by. And
Hmm.
that would be something that I would feel is kind of a karmic thing, not anything that was passed down to us, just where it lands.
Well, and I can see like karma for uh my Saturn is in the first house, so it's seen, and it's in Capricorn.
Okay.
It's in the Saturn rules Capricorn. And that makes sense because I was a motherless child and I was seen, and how that affected me and how I kind of use that to sometimes hide, um, not to be seen. Oh, well, I don't have the same things as other people. So I could see where that would, if I look at generational and trauma, um, how that structure, but how could I use that structure then to be seen? Like, where's your
Hmm.
Saturn?
Mine is in my seventh house,
Ah,
in Aquarius in my seventh house. So it's
and
kind
you,
of a double whammy for me,
yeah,
you
so
know.
why do you tell people why that's a double whammy? Because it
Well,
is.
that has to do with your marriage and partnerships. But the thing about that, that's true. And the thing about, I have a very good marriage on overall. I just get bogged down with it sometimes, like, oh, just that commitment, not that I want to date anybody else, but the commitment for dinner, the commitment for, the laundry every week, kind of things like that. But I'm just teasing, but it is in that house. So I have to giggle because
Well, and
I definitely think of that when I have those moments of, I just don't even want to cook for anybody, not you, not anybody.
well, and in Aquarius, it's about the ideal. That's a lot of pressure for the structure of what a family has to be,
Yeah.
what a relationship has to be, what social things have to be, because that is also the house of social. And I could see that, like you mentioned, when you were trying to get pregnant and everybody was pregnant, socially, that trauma lent to the structure. Everybody in the world can do this except me. That
Uh-huh.
moment.
That's the trauma eyes. That's the thing. Everybody lies to me. It's everything you want to see.
Yeah.
you know
And
and when
so,
you're dealing with somebody that's looking through trauma eyes, you just get frustrated because it doesn't matter, and then you start to think, why do they, it's so bizarre, it's such a circle, and truly it's the person isn't going to see no matter how you say, because they're still in their trauma eyes, and that's okay because they're realizing slowly that what worked for me in the past isn't going to work very long. The person who's fearful of abandonment, who is not going to take a stand because if I do, nobody's going to like me, is going to end up driving people away because they're just too wishy-washy. They say one thing, different reasons, and then we call it self-sabotaging, but really that's what
well,
ends up
and
happening. So
that's a
Saturn.
great time then if you're feeling like that to look at what do I have in my Saturn, not what
That's
I
exactly
don't
what I
have.
was going to say. Figure yourself out with it. I mean, I gave myself a lot of grace when I looked at it. It was like, well, that makes sense. For me, I felt that instead of, yeah, that's me, totally me. I looked at it more like, yes, okay, now what do I do with this? Great. Because people go, well, I don't know what my inner core wound is. Okay, well, look at that. It'll make sense. And then you're like, I do know. That is it.
That's the conversation because it your Chiron is very related to your moon, which is the next place we're going to go.
Yeah.
Um, but after Saturn, right? You could have looked at your Saturn as, oh, in relationships, I just have two high ideals, so nothing's ever going to work, as opposed to, oh, I actually do have some ideals, so I can learn about boundaries that perhaps my trauma never allowed me to experience because I was in survival. Again, it's how I use this information, this map, you know,
You can
what
use it as a coach that's telling you get in the game and do that, and or you can look at the coach and think I can't do that. I mean, that's just me. I'm not a guy that can do. It's either way you look at it, and I look at it like just the template of, wow, that makes sense why I do that, and I definitely need to work on things. Okay, so we were talking all those things I feel are karmic. And then you brought up the moon. And I
yes.
agree because that moon is the expression. So I feel like what we talked about so far and other things there's way more we could dive into. But I
And
feel a
will
lot
be.
of,
We have another
yeah,
half hour, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But I feel like those things are there. They came with us. Now the moon is our expression
Hmm.
of everything, our emotions, all those things in the reality or in the 3D world. Now that we're here, kind of deal. This is how we're going to. Am I saying that right? I don't want to say things that I
Oh
don't
no,
work with that. I
it's
work with
it.
the trauma, not necessarily that so much, but
Well,
yeah.
she and I talk about astrology. It is true. It's our private energy. So how am I going to work with this? It is also our intuition and our DNA imprint. So it's like the
Oh, it does
interpreter.
come with that, yeah.
Yeah, it's the interpreter of our wound, our structure, our will, all of those things that are kind of limiting. The moon in its magic, the moon is in charge of nurturing. How do I work with these things? How do I um, really take a look at these things, and how am I talking to myself? The moon is our placement. It's the energy that only we know. And that is a great place really to start. If you had to start with something to look at your moon.
Oh, yeah,
Where
exactly.
it's because it's one of the big three, your
Yeah,
and
yeah,
your
I
sun
guess you're
and
right.
your rising sign. And but I think all of those other things feed into that, and starting to know the things that talk to our moon all the time, our structure.
Okay, and when you said that word talk, I just wanted to pop in and say that's kind of the place to start with yourself in your own inner trauma. We're missing those words. Oftentimes, we weren't told the things we needed to hear as a child. And so, those things we missed, we need to tell ourselves. But then people say, well, I don't know what I'd even say to myself. I mean, what do you mean? Now that you can look at those things, even your moon, all those things, you can start there even. The next time something pops up and you see it in your trauma eyes, you think, to yourself, I did this. This is what I did. When something would pop up, I would say to myself, and I would use my name, and I would say, that is not true, Jackie. That was the first thing I'd say in my head. And I made a conscious effort. This was over, it took me, I thought I'd do it for 6 months. And within about 3 weeks, I was just automatically talking like this to myself. It was crazy. But I'd say, that's not true, Jackie. You're just, you're just afraid, or you're just upset right now. You're just, frustrated. I would try to do that so that I could change my trauma eyes.
Mhm.
So I didn't own everything in that. So those are good places to start because you get yourself a little grace and you go, oh, that's why. So now when I react this way, I can say, no, that's not. I'm okay. I'm not really what
I
this
think
is.
that that's really important because, again, how I speak to myself is usually very related to how I was spoken to. So as much as we try uh, to, we understand that wasn't the way the world is, and we've seen other things. That's not how we're necessarily talking to ourselves. And so
Exactly.
I love that exercise. Kitty, really, is that
That's not
really?
true.
It's not true. Is that really how you want to see this? What else do you see? Just
Yes.
as a teacher, I would say that to children, but I never said it in my own head. So that moon energy that you have is your private energy that you tap into that
And then
only
pretty soon
you
you
see.
like yourself as a friend because you can go, okay, that's not true. And you realize that I'm not that person. That's my trauma eyes. I'm not that. I'm not the person everybody lies to. I'm really not. That's just my trauma. And
Right.
it does those things. So people always wonder, where can I start? Where I believe it's that tape. And then you think, well, another thing a lot of people like to do is post like the affirmations up where they read them and see it continuously. And that's a great thing. I listen to them sometimes when I sleep off YouTube, and they'll play it for your subconscious at night, just different things, to change how you think. But you're right. Your moon would be a good spot when you talk about expression and voice and
So
all
you
those
look at
things, how you
so
talk.
right. So what's your moon, Jackie?
My moon's in Gemini in my 11th house.
So for her, she has an energy that is always looking at the polarity, always holding the components of opposites. That's Gemini, and it's a thinking energy. It's the energy of air. And in the 11th house, it's friends and blessings. So knowing that that's the energy that's in there, what am I going to tap into? Am I going to get into yelling at myself back and forth, which you've told me you used to do? Oh, it's me. No,
Hmm.
it's, like my own little, and there are no friends. I have no friends. This is my house. This is my energy. So I love that you said, no, Jackie, that's just not true. Just,
Hmm.
it's not, I don't
But
need
then
it.
let me just say that the truth of it is, though, sometimes it just feels good to go back to that trauma for 1 minute and say that and have a moment of pity. But I got to tell you, once you start to look at your wounds and that's how you like yourself, because they're there, they're not your fault. And as
Mhm.
soon as you can understand they're there and they're not your fault, that gives yourself that grace. And then you can change your thinking, and then you can start to like yourself because you're starting to know who you really are instead of guarding your trauma. And
Right.
and that's what
And
we do is
your trauma is a tool you have come into this world to experience. I do know it's hard for people to say, oh, I wouldn't have ever chose this. But there was an energy you chose and your trauma afforded you to work with it. It just did. Our experiences afford us something that we kind of sign
maybe
up
you're
for to work with.
just the cycle breaker. And
Right.
I hate to just say that, maybe that's all you get, but it's a big gift. If
Yep.
you're the cycle breaker, that's the biggest gift you leave behind. And gift for yourself. It really is at the moment, but it's not what you're saying. People are looking for that. But,
Yep.
even if in the end, all you got out of all of it was survival and you broke the cycle, what a gift. Because once you heal, you interact with people differently. So that ripple effect of healing happens. That person you always engage the same way, when you come healed, not manipulating, when you actually come healed, there's a difference. You think you're healed and you come in there to manipulate. Wow, you're something. Not that. When you're actually healed, you just don't even care anymore about those same little things that used to bug you, used to hang on to. You just interact differently with the world. Then you start to be able to like yourself. Then you start to be able to talk even better about yourself. Geez, that's not true. You're just this goes to sometimes now when I cry, I can actually go, gosh, I love you. You're okay. I can't even believe I can say that. I mean, so trauma works in weird ways, but there's weird ways to get over it.
Well, and I think if you're here now, you chose to break some cycles. This is a time of breaking cycles, of moving. And again, if I'm healed, I'm also healing all of the lines, my next sisters and my ancestors both. Um, you
And
know,
it's never too late. If my kids are grown, no, never too late. You can change that adult relationship even. I mean, never too late to heal. Never. Yeah, never. It's
no,
never too late.
it's never too late, and there is something you chose to come and work with this in, whether it's just to break.
Exactly.
And
And if you're
let's not
unaware,
use the word. Let's not use the word just. It's to break the cycle because that's a biggie. You know,
yes,
if you
yes,
come from a long family of alcoholism and you break that cycle, that's huge. You break a lot
yes.
of patterns when you break that cycle. You know, if
Hmm.
if physical abuse, mental abuse, abandonment, commitment issues, all of those things.
And in your chart, you can see where let's just use this word, and I would say your weaker areas are.
Mhm.
And when you know your weaker areas, you then can start to set boundaries for those areas because now you know where they are. So many of us walk around and we just don't know. We know we've had trauma, we know this, we know we see through, we just don't know what. And I feel when you look at these certain aspect things planets we've talked about tonight, you can kind of look at yourself and think if you're hovering above, wow, now that makes sense. That's
Well,
where I do struggle. And
and
I do need to have more courage because it's in this house or whatever, that's how you can interpret it all.
yes, because a house for folks to understand is the area of your life the conversation's taking place in. So for me, Chiron was the second house in what is valued. So not only do I not think I have anything to offer, in what I do have to offer, I wasn't thinking is valued. So that's, they play into each other. And the other thing is knowing those tools you chose to help you with those things. Where in my chart is the energy of expansion? Um, Pluto's an interesting energy because not only can it constrain you because it wants you to change, but it is also the area that you can choose to change. And taking a look at where that might be, what area that shows up. Um, it, it's very interesting. There's another point which is the opposite of the moon, called Black Lilith, and that's the free will. That is another area. Why don't you speak to that? Because we were talking about that earlier today. Black Lilith.
Oh, no, go ahead. Okay, the Black Lilith on it. It's, but go continue. I'll let you continue. You were doing that so well. I'm listening to you talk about it, and I'll talk about the trauma with it.
So Black Lilith is your free will. It is the opposite place of your moon, hence its name. Black Moon Lilith is its full name, actually. And it is the place where, we always talk about philosophies and then these three words, accept free will. So you have Mars that is a will that has an energy for how you align, but Black Lilith is kind of the wild card. So like if you are, I'm a Black Lilith in Cancer, which by the way happens to be a huge placement about generational changes because it's about nurturing. But in Black Lilith, it's always keeping one foot out the door in relationships because Black Lilith is my free will and not trusting relationships. But knowing that allows me to go, It also allows me the gift of stepping back in relationships and not getting sucked into certain things. I avoided, for me, some trauma as a child because I always had a foot out the door. Always. And
Yeah.
now it didn't really help my dating life very much, but it's again, it's how this energy. So why don't you talk about the trauma?
Well, right. Well, with the Black Lilith, that's a lot of your shadow.
Mhm.
That when people talk shadow work or the inner work or things like that, that can be a lot of that shadow, the darker side, the one foot out the door side of her that, you were talking about. And that's when people talk about your shadow work, they're really talking about that. Hence, opposite of the moon, I would go with that. The whole thing is your shadow. The parts of you that you secretly love, but really are but really are some of your darker side, I would just say.
Oh, it's your darker side, and it's
But if
trying.
you turn it positive, like you were saying, that one foot out the door just kept you from getting too sucked down in wrong things like that. If you can see it with that kind of light, it is a good part to investigate
Oh, for me,
because you can turn around and change that or be aware of it.
for me, it was. I was the oldest. Um, it's a cycle breaker placement. So where Black Lilith is, there are certain things that where they are break cycles. So me being able to have a foot out the door, I was kind of in my family growing up, I was the little mother. And in a lot of very interesting with Chiron and Black Lilith, a very interesting conversation always, because I've got this Chiron that not important and even I don't have much to offer, which allowed me to invalidate what I needed as a kid so I could be this little mother. But because the Black Lilith part of me could keep foot out the door, I didn't take it as personally.
Oh,
So
that's
it
good.
helped me break the cycle. Now, sometimes I've had it as I've been an adult thinking, God, are you missing compassion or what? Because, there are people who are very empathic, and I'm going, I can
Yeah.
I can just be very, and it's also because I do keep a foot out the door. That's how I keep that Leo moon that I
And
own,
this
which is
is what I'm
about
talking about.
me.
I love how you're talking about you like that. It's almost like you're hovered above. You're not judging yourself. You're just aware. And and that's the thing about people who have trauma. We spend too much judging. So it's so important to hover
Say that
above.
again. We spend too much time judging.
We do. And then
Mhm.
and especially ourselves. So, just like she was just saying there's an example of how you should look at it. You should just look at it like, yeah, that's me, 1 foot out the door, and knowing that that's a problem. But like you saw the little smile, there's a part of you that likes it.
Hmm.
It's okay. All of it's okay. All of your trauma is okay, really. You'll do
Right.
just fine. But if you
And
give yourself the
ultimately,
grace,
ultimately, that is a gift that trauma can give you, is a new level of acceptance, because you have to work at getting there. You do, because when you have trauma eyes, you interact with the world differently, and as you heal the trauma, you decide, you know what, that doesn't need to be true anymore. You know,
hmm
what was a problem has already happened. One of the things about trauma is the worst already kind of happened. So, okay. And I'm not
yeah.
saying it's not a challenge to the universe to say, make it worse. No, no, it's not that. It's
Well, you might
really
even learn why you have difficulty letting go of things, looking at your chart. And
right,
then from there, you can interpret what I would need to gain because you could look at what house it's in. There's so many things and get some answers. And that's what we're all kind of looking for in our trauma is some answers. We all get the answers of how we got there and what led to it and how these people and all, how the disease about, I'm just using alcoholism, that's not all trauma, but how the disease works. We all get that.
right,
But these are how we start that conversation with ourselves. These are how we learn to understand who we are and what beliefs we've just been imprinted with that, we are different. And why my starting out was, why does this always happen to me and not her? Gets answered a little bit more. You start to
mm,
realize, because I see a lot through my trauma eyes in
right.
this area, or right. And so a lot of your answers come from looking at that. And if you can just see yourself from above and know that, oh, that's why,
Right. And I love, I think that's really important, and not judge it.
and
This
not judge it.
this this chart I have isn't a punishment,
No,
isn't isn't it set in stone. This is something I use, and there are tools. I have an understanding how I'm going to interact with it, is accepting, like, just like when you would say, Jackie, that isn't true. I would say, Kitty, it's just okay. You can feel what you want. You don't have to fix it for everybody else. And if you feel neutral, you feel neutral. Yay. You know?
oops, well, I was gonna, sorry, my earbud fell off. I was gonna say too, that if you realize your chart, then you can start, if you're a people pleaser, which is super common with trauma and women, if you're a people pleaser, then you can understand someone else's karma and you understand it's their lesson and you don't need to interrupt their lesson and it's going to be okay. And that is exactly where their placement is. And that is their lesson. And I will let them have it. And as a people pleaser, that is such a good feeling because I'm still a lot, I'm learning to let go and allow the universe to take over. So I'm learning trust of myself. I'm learning all kinds of things. So as a people pleaser, you would never want to run in and ruin somebody's karma so that they have to keep living it over and over and over because you came in and rescued them each time. You didn't let them have their moment of
And
whatever it is. So that's my point. I feel that people pleasers, you will gain from the karma. You'll know where you came from, but also you can understand once you get you can trust that the universe is going to help the next guy too, and you're not needed. And that's
eh,
a tough one, but
it's a tough one. And what starts to happen is then you start attracting people who bring you the lessons of what you want to learn. Like
yes,
people who can be assertive without it being a people pleaser. You start learning other things because you let them have their, and you can even honestly have gratitude for them. Wow, I really did recently. I really did learn about, wow, people really can spend a lot of time creating their own narratives rather than just being. And so all of a sudden, I'm noticing the people in my life that teach me about being, or teach me to see that's a huge thing. And I love that. You're looking above at this. How am I going to use this energy? How do I step forth in all of these different ways. And, you know, when I'm a people pleaser, I want to attract people that help me learn boundaries, who help me learn the boundaries. You know, if
And we're
I'm
Saturn, you can almost go in certain areas and figure out, right, exactly. Why do I struggle here? All these things.
right, why are boundaries? Look where my boundaries are. You know,
Yes.
uh,
I'm
there's
really
a
good here, but I'm not so good here. I mean, you can start to see that, okay, it's not that I don't have them. I'm really good here and I'm not so good here. And you can weigh yourself out. And then you know what you do? You know it yourself. All of a sudden you go,
Mhm.
wow, that's who I am. I'm really that girl.
Right,
I don't have.
and also you're just living your life going, wow, this is cool. I'm not thinking about everyone else, and it
And the
doesn't mean
hardest thing about healing, though, Kitty, and I think I told you this, is the hardest thing about healing is when you love somebody and you see that they're not going to heal in this lifetime. That's a hard thing to watch. And sometimes we just have to know that maybe that's the way it's meant for them. And it's not necessarily what we think. It might be part of their little chart. But that's the thing about healing. Not everybody's going to do it. But you know what? You can have a lot more compassion for those that don't.
right. You don't need once you start removing those judgments, you don't need to have judgments
Exactly.
because maybe that's what they signed up for. I want to live what it feels like not to be healed. For whatever reason, we have no idea what that experience was about.
And
Maybe
then
they
you can
were
like them for who they are. That's what, and so many times when we've grown up in trauma, that's the part. We don't really know, we don't really feel like we have a choice of who's in our life. We don't know how to, there's things that are limiting beliefs we grew up with, and we just don't think we might be a good friend. We don't know anything about those things. And so this is a good way to start to know ourselves, get some let go of that judgment, find more self compassion. So then you look at the people who aren't going to heal and they're not so offensive. They're not so this, they're not so, and you don't have to own any of
right.
it. You can,
You remove your judgments and tendrils around them. And the thing is, when I do heal my generational trauma, it's healed. It heals it back. And so maybe in there, someone who didn't do it in this life gets that energy anyway as they come into the next life.
and
I
you'll
don't know.
find that once you start your own tapes of love and self love, and this isn't true, and this is really, I'm just frustrated. I'm not stupid. I'm frustrated and I'll get it. Okay. Those kinds of things. Pretty soon when you start talking like that, then you can start accepting people. It just is natural. You just start to not even care because it's life. You just feel like everything's acceptable and
You,
I can trust.
you really do. We have about 10 minutes left, and
Okay,
there's
I'm
only
sorry.
no, that's good. There's
Yeah.
only one thing I wanted to say, and I think I'm going to be inviting Jackie back for uh, another conversation about it, because one of the things that starts as you look at your healing, you can look at your role as a mother, you can look at your role as a spouse, and take a look at their charts, something called a synastry chart, and really look at those relationships there. There are aspects in those relationships that you start to learn about that are, especially when you're raising, oh, you know, even if I've already raised my child, let me look at maybe perhaps what those first 4 years were. And I can be aware of that even as they are an adult in those relationships, how that may have played out or not played out. So
And as you look at those, I just want to pass this on to everybody. As you look at those um, aspects on the charts and your synergy with the other people, don't just look at the opposition. Remember to look at where you do connect. Because sometimes us trauma people with our trauma eyes, always trying to figure it out, want to go right for where opposition is, and nothing wrong with that. But be sure to take a look at where it does go really well together too. Because that's how you learn to like yourself as well. You
well,
look at what's good in you too. So I agree like that.
one of the interesting things about a parent is in the first years, especially the first beginning years, it's really about the conversations taking place in your house because you are guiding the children. As they get into their 20s, late teens, up until pretty much that first Saturn return, a little bit into the 30s, it it's starting to even out. It's about their house and your house. Then it starts to be about your child's house where the conversation
Hmm.
takes place and not your house. And you're now more of the observer, only you're, yeah, until you're not cognitive. So there's all, like you said, look at the things that work really, really well. I wanted to see if there were any questions because I don't want to,
Okay.
but I definitely would like you to come back so we could talk a little bit about
I'd
that.
love to come back. That'd be fun.
And because it is interesting, once we learn about ourselves, let's learn what that can look like with someone else's chart. If anyone, Sue Sendin had said, I had a chance to heal and release a huge trauma handed down from my grandmother to mom to me. It was an incredible experience.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
especially when you know about them. And sometimes you'll never know about them. Or as you start to learn, you go, oh, well, that makes sense. That makes total sense. We again, it's that DNA imprint. Does anyone have, if they have a question or a comment they want to make, or
Well, me being Native American, and not raised on a reservation or anything, my grandmother was. I just still feel that sadness. And that's one thing that we were talking about, people talking about being light workers, or I have all this light energy. And I thought, wow, I really don't. I feel like, I do, but I have this sadness, or sorrow would be the word. My friend Dusty said it's sorrow, not sad. It's sorrow. Well, I later read that healers of the Native Americans carry that sorrow. And I thought, and then I look at my Chirons in the eighth house in Pisces, so many things that, yes, I would carry all
yeah,
that.
that's the wound of
Yeah.
faith. Yeah.
So I'm just saying, there's so much to learn about that, or gain from learning about that.
One of the interesting things I learned about Chiron is there are very few people with Chiron and Libra. Chiron has a very unusual um, orbit. If you draw it out, it's not symmetrical, so it does not spend the same amount of time in each sign. It spends a long time in Aries, where it is right now. Actually, it spends many years, but it doesn't spend a whole lot of time in Libra because of
Hmm.
the shape of Chiron being. As a matter of fact, they're only, because of the strange orbit of Chiron. I learned this from a teacher, astrological teacher of mine that I so enjoy. She's actually going to be on later this month. Her her name is Divine Harmony, and she talked about that they can only go back so far or project so far because of the unusual orbit. As a matter of fact, she said if somebody tells you what Christ's Chiron sign is, it's only a projection because it gets hidden in its orbit where it is in the sky. So that was just something kind of fun or interesting to learn about Chiron.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I just read an article, and I told Kitty about this earlier, where a lady does astrology and she's a therapist. And so she's done her clients' charts along the way, and she's come up with certain areas that people might have finance things. I mean, just all these different kinds of domestic abuse, even. I mean, she has found certain aspects that have been the same for her domestic abuse victims that come in. So lots of interesting things. I didn't get very far yet in that article, but what an eye opener that one was.
Well, it is because you can really, I mean, I was following, there's a woman who uses astrology for crimes, and she talks about what different degrees in crimes mean. Find it fascinating, you
Yeah,
know, just so many things about what's in the sky,
and
that's
that's why I say trauma isn't your fault. That's the point, and we own it so tightly, and we
right,
carry it so snugly. And the thing is, it's not even ours to carry. So when you can really see those things, you can really realize, oh, I'm just carrying that. It's not me.
right.
I can heal that. Oh, that sorrow I've always felt. I just thought it was me, and now I get where it might stem from, and I get why it affects me so much because
Yeah,
of my, all those reasons. And those of us that live and have experienced trauma, or many of us, and everybody really has, if we all realized it, we could all speak more openly about it. But, um, you know, we just need to know that, wow, this isn't our fault. This isn't our fault. I mean, yeah,
it's
but
not our
it,
fault, and it doesn't define me. It's a
right.
way, it's a tool, it's a way to look at it. I love that idea. Look above it. I don't have to judge it. Yeah, it's here's my judgment of it. it sucked. Stephen Colbert said, I am extremely grateful for something I never wish happened to me. Still never wish happened to him.
Yeah, that's
He,
about right.
um,
If you can change it. And you really can feel that way.
yeah, I'm extremely grateful for what it has taught me.
And mostly what happens is once you start to heal, it's not that you don't ever have that regret or resentment or whatever pop up again. And it does pop up and it can be almost as deep, but it's just momentarily. It's just the weirdest thing. I don't hold it like I used to. It comes in a wave, might make me shed a tear for a second, and then it just goes. It's like, okay, that was okay. I got through that. Where before that could have sent me into a tizzy and been a deal,
Yep.
and I could have held it for a month or, whatever. So
So
yeah, great places to start tonight for them
I think
to
so.
take a peek and look at what they are and see what they might be carrying that they don't even own but
Right.
have been owning.
And then, so our next part two is going to be about how we do that in relationships, how we look at that, and how we can
Oh,
support each other in those relationships. Well, I want to say thank you to everyone. We here on Intuition of Soul, if you're watching this on replay, please feel free to reach out to Jackie. I'll put her
thank you.
contact information in. Reach out through Intuition of the Soul. This will be in our library of um, our speakers that come, and we will do a part two. So thank you,
So,
Cynthia, for joining us, and Karen, and those who joined us
thank you,
on.
everybody.
And take care. Very much.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
having me, Kitty.
Oh,
Bye.
you're welcome. Bye.